Thank you very much, Sarah, for having accepted the invitation, for the time and generosity. I'm really pleased to talk to you. If you don't mind, I will start with a kind of introductory note about you, and then we'll start with the questions. So Professor Sarah Stitzlein is a professor of education and affiliate professor of philosophy at the University of Cincinnati. She's also president of John Dewey Society, co-editor of the journal Democracy in Education, and co-director of the Center for Hope and Justice Education, which I find really interesting. You have written prolifically. I chose like a couple of books. Breaking Bad Habits, I think that was your first book. Breaking Bad Habits, Transforming Race and Gender in Schools, 2008. Teaching for Decent Citizenship, Education and Political Activism, 2012. And American Public Education and the Responsibility of its Citizens, 2017. And the book that we are going to focus on today, Learning How to Hope, Reviving Democracy Through Schools and Civil Society, 2020. So again, thank you very much. And I hope I like my introduction was still updated.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. So, Sarah, my first question is the title of your book, Learning How to Hope. Is hope really something one can learn?
Yeah, that is a good question. We often talk about hope as if it's something that's just in us. Like we either have it or we don't. Like it's almost something like we hold, like it's you grasp hope. And I don't think that's a very helpful way of understanding what it is, because that makes it seem like it's something out there that we kind of hold on to, and then we put it in us and we hold on to it until something really bad happens, and then it slips away and we have to start that whole process over again. And I just don't think that really reflects how hope is something that we build and grow and nurture through our own activities, our daily lives. And as I talk about in the book, through the way we develop our habits, the way we actually develop predispositions and proclivities to certain ways of seeing the world, interacting with the world. And because it is based in our habits, habits are something we can teach, something we can cultivate and nurture and grow through schools. So that's for me why I'm writing about hope in the context of schools, because I see it as something we can educate.
Yeah, great. But Sarah, it's not the first time that your take of hope is quite innovative your take of habit actually is quite innovative in your first book, and you've even detailed that habits of race and racism. I'm quoting you, habits of privileging white people over others. These habits, for example, impact the way we hear, fail to hear, or ignore the perspectives and experiences of people of color, thereby shaping a democracy where not all participants are fully equal and where the interests of some citizens are weighted most heavily than others, as we determine common goods and just deserts for. Again, even in that book, you're talking about race and racism, interestingly, as some habits. I would be
Yeah.
thankful if you could also elaborate on that.
Yeah, so habits have quite an array of, not sure what word to use. I want to say platforms. So they can be physical, the way we move and walk and talk. They can be, I said speech, the way we talk. They can be the way we think about the world, the way we process it and interact with it. So some of those habits come to be labeled in racial ways. Like we come to identify certain practices as indicative of people of certain races. The way patterns of speech, for example, which words we choose to use, how we, the cadence of our voice, etc., can be identified as certain racial groupings. But what really concerns me more is not necessarily the way we inhabit our race, but the way we respond to race through habits. So especially when those become what I call bad habits of racism, where we become, sometimes I want to say stagnant, like we don't we're not able to keep up with the changing world around us or the changing people around us because we wall ourselves off from those who are different, from new experiences, from alternative perspectives. And that kind of practice of setting up a wall keeps us from adapting to our environment, and it's ultimately harmful. And I think racism is actually a way that we do that. We come to act in ways that shore up those divisions between groups and prevent us from communicating and interacting well across them.
Interesting. I mean, for me, that actually what drew my attention to the book was that at least two reasons I can name. Like one, the first one was that I was and still I am a teacher, although I'm teaching language. I'm teaching Persian. And the other reason was that recently when I got back to the book, if you remember, we had like we exchanged two emails in two different phases. So the second phase, when I got back to the book, I thought that God, that can be even helpful for my concern about the Iranian society, which is gradually getting more and more polarized. So
Yeah.
another issue that I sort of relate to the book is sort of this concern with polarization. However, you're mainly talking about American society, but I have here a quote from you that the book is a result of, I'm quoting you, politically contentious times when citizens tend to hitch their hope on particular politicians. So another reason you wrote this book. What's the relation between polarization and hope in that
Yeah.
regard?
Ooh. Oh, that's a hard one. To say a little bit more about that quote you just selected, I've noticed, particularly, it was really pronounced when Barack Obama was elected president in the United States, that a lot of folks on the left were very excited about his election. And literally, we had my husband, for example, had a T-shirt that had a picture of Barack Obama on it, and it just said "hope" underneath. And it was like people were excited to think he was going to bring great, wonderful change to the country. And, I'll set aside the commentary on whether or not that actually fleshed out. But by the time that President Trump then came in 8 years later, we saw this like pendulum swing clear to the other side, where then it was folks on the right who were all excited that like Trump was going to come in as this hero figure and save the day and bring about great change. And in both cases, folks on the right and the left often felt unfulfilled by their leaders, that they fell short of their hopes and their expectations. And so I think what happens in that moment is citizens aren't stepping up to the plate themselves in terms of taking on their responsibilities to improve the world. They're waiting on those hero figures to lead the way, to lead the charge, and to do the hard work. And when that happens, sometimes we become very passive and accepting of kind of the mainstream way of things are going. And when we disagree with folks, those rifts grow stronger and stronger as we aren't actually taking responsibility for mending or working across them. And so as the polarization has increased, we find ourselves seeking out other like-minded folks, others who share our views, share our background, share our perspectives. And that sort of feedback loop and echo chambers are making that polarization worse and stronger. And so we confine our hopes then to those two polarized groups. At least here in the United States, it tends to be two very distinct groups. And we confine our hopes to only like heroic figures within those groups, rather than thinking about the role of the citizens themselves, or even being open to learning from and hearing from people on the other side of those groups. So hope really struggles when you're in that divided space. It struggles to get off the ground. You can have
Definitely.
kind of little moments that come up in
Mm,
each of the groups, but they don't really work across each other
mm.
very well.
Wonderful, very beautiful answer. Sorry, already in the beginning of the book, you make your project, or you make your understanding of hope completely different from what one can imagine in a self-help book. I mean, the
Yeah.
understanding of hope. One example is that you also make this distinction between hope and grit, right?
Mhm.
Could you please elaborate on that? I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah. So,
Although
and
you
I
have devoted a whole book on that, I know, but
No, that's okay. And this is something that I'll be honest in saying I don't know much about the context outside of the United States, but grit has had a very big, uh, shall I say, following in recent years. Like a lot of people have got on the grit wagon. And it's something that has been coming into a lot of our local schools, new programs to develop the grittiness of our students. And at first I was like, okay, that sounds good. I like the idea of children being resilient and showing persistence and, working through challenges. I think that's something that nearly everyone wants to celebrate. But I started to see that grit caused an array of problems, in large part because it puts the onus on the individual, in this case, student or child, to endure some really crummy circumstances. So, for example, we tell in America some of our poorest children who are going to underfunded, schools where literally there are walls crumbling and poor facilities, and we're telling them if they just work hard enough, if they just try enough, they're gonna get ahead and they'll earn a better life for themselves. And I felt, one, that was unfair because it was just so rare for folks to be able to overcome some of those conditions. But more so, what concerned me is that that kind of grit focus leaves the problems in place. It doesn't work to eliminate inequities, racial injustice, et cetera. It leaves those all in place, and it just tells each individual to keep trying rather than, hey, let's work together to figure out, how do we offer better educational opportunities to all of our citizens? How do we end racism so that everyone is treated equitably? Those conversations are pushed to the side when we emphasize grit. And so when I turn to hope instead, I'm saying that hope is something that activates us and gets us doing things. I talk about hope as a verb, hoping, like we're actually doing something. In that way, it shows some resemblance to grit, but it has a much more social nature, and it's much more concerned with improving the conditions so that ourselves and others can benefit. Whereas grit is just getting ahead for me and only me.
Sarah, I have a quote from you from the book, which is not completely unrelated to what you already said. That you say, while many philosophers, psychologists, and theologians describe hope in individualist terms, a pragmatic notion of hope works to encompass the larger social process of hoping. It connects individuals to each other, to other people, and can be used not only to pursue our individual goals, but also to enrich our experience in communities and our larger outlook on life in a democracy. I found it really beautiful and interesting and helpful. I mean, not only um, at least in the Iranian society. I mean, that is something that I think, of course, I mean, it's not comparable. I mean, I don't think that our understanding of hope in Iran is that much individualized, but it is very much under theological understanding of
Yes. Yes.
hope, right? So do you have any more
Yeah.
explanations about this beautiful quote?
It's hard because I do know that there are folks who find hope in religious contexts, whether that is when they are reading a religious text or when they're in prayer or feeling some connection to their God. But what concerns me is often it's not sustainable. So I think of folks like a Nelson Mandela, who's literally imprisoned and it's just him, and he's having to keep on going after all those, tough struggles. And yes, there are a few who can turn to religious beliefs, etc., in those moments. But for many, if we are cordoned off from others, it's really hard to sustain a positive outlook on our futures. It's difficult to keep our spirits looking up. Even the most ardently faithful can struggle with that. But when we situate ourselves with others who are actively hoping, we feed each other that hope, nurtures each other. And so it builds, when you're having the conversation with someone and you both feel excited and you have a new idea and you want to work together to try something, that spirit of hope I find far more sustainable than the more individualist theological notions of hope.
But Sarah, especially because now we are talking about Mandela as an example, do you think that your project of hope, which is completely concrete and pragmatic, as you call it,
Mhm.
um, in a society where there is not actually a platform for this kind of a reciprocal, like give and take in terms of
Yeah.
responsibility, hope, and yeah, citizenship, do you think it makes um like hero redundant?
Hmm.
Because rarely, I don't remember any moment in the book that you talked about heroes. Perhaps it's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
really, yeah, so it's not that heroes are going to inspire us. Perhaps you talk about some philosophers like John Dewey, as perhaps like a
sure,
pragmatic
sure.
hero, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
in a society where, yeah, sorry, go
I'm
ahead.
not really sure how to answer this question. I suppose, heroes can energize us and get us excited about new ideas or help sustain us when we are struggling, if we're feeling oppressed in society, etc. But I am leery to put too much emphasis on the role of heroes because I really want citizens to feel that responsibility rests with them to step forward, that hope is on their shoulders, if that expression is familiar to you, that they have this responsibility to act and enact it. And so I worry that too much talk of heroes deters from that responsibility.
A very short question, probably with a long answer. I'm sorry. Is that you devoted a chapter, actually a big part of a chapter on uh, some characteristics, or let's say like four factors when you're explaining how one of them is inquiry, the other is growth, truth, and realism. Could you please like briefly talk about them, their role in this project of hope?
Yeah. Well, as a pragmatist, I support an idea of inquiry. For me, it's largely growing out of John Dewey, though there are similarities in the work of Charles Peirce and William James. But for me, inquiry is the key for when we find ourselves in what Dewey calls indeterminate situations. It's when we're stuck, when we're not sure how to proceed, how to move forward. We've encountered some obstacle that's hindering our ability. That's when we start to ask questions, when we try to understand our world, understand what's inhibiting us, and then we seek answers. We look to others to identify, are others struggling? What have they tried? Have their attempts been successful? And then working with others, we generate proposals for change, ideas, hypothesis about what we can do better. I really like that inquiry approach because what it does, it's in that moment of generating new ideas, generating proposals with other small groups, or what John Dewey would call publics, that come forward around a shared concern. That's when we experience hoping. It's when in that moment of like, let's try this. And then an inquiry, you give it a try. And then it's not just like it's done at that point. You return to it again to verify that the inquiry proved successful. And one way it proves successful is through growth, so that it leads you from that indeterminate situation into future experiences smoothly from one to the next. And that those situations satisfy your needs, enable you to flourish, and the society around you to flourish. And so that becomes kind of the criteria for determining whether the inquiry worked. In terms of truth, often we need some truth to guide our inquiry. That's something we're struggling with in the United States and elsewhere. Debates over basic facts of the world right now. And that makes hope difficult when we're not all on the same playing field in terms of what key ideas mean, what our history is, etc. So truth is important to having good inquiry, if nothing else. And then finally, the idea of meliorism. Pragmatists hold that through hard work, the world can be made better. And they look at history to say, we have evidence that, we have overcome significant hardships in the past, from the physical world as well as the political and cultural struggles. And that through that hard work, we can improve those conditions. And so I hold out that kind of meliorism as the guiding spirit of hope, that through effort, we can improve the world together. So that's kind of the 4 parts I put together in my account of hope.
Great, thank you. I have a part from the book, and then I would be happy if you just expand it a bit. Like when it is mainly one group that is able to focus its efforts on hope without regard for other for the hopeful visions of other people, the cycle of hatred and fear is reinforced. It is actually my interpretation, it's not from the book. So you have this interesting quote from Judith Green, another interesting philosopher. So storytelling, according to her, storytelling is a process of moving from fear and loss to vision and hope, a process through which many of us as individuals and all of us as people still must pass in order to bring us to the stage of readiness for cooperative, democracy deepening, transformative action. So what is this storytelling in here and your project?
Yeah, so that storytelling is powerful because it's, excuse me, it's a way of generating those ideas. I talked about inquiry as being one way that we put forward ideas. Storytelling is a more humanities and narrative-based way of saying, here's what's happened in the past, here's what we've learned from it, and then here's how we could imagine the world being better moving forward. It gives us some vision of how things might be, or could be, or can be. And I like how Judith Green uses storytelling as a way for individuals to express their visions, but also for people collectively to come together to talk about how the world could be otherwise, how it could be different from the way it currently is. Stories, can go a long way in sustaining us when we're facing despair, reminding us that there are, the opportunity for better things ahead. And they also showcase those who have worked hard in the past. When I talk about meliorism, it showcases the efforts that others have made and what we can learn from them today. So I'm talking about storytelling both as backward looking, but also as forward projected.
So perhaps like storytelling can be a medium in order to depict the heroes in a sense, no? I mean,
Yeah,
those who have resisted against cynicism or pessimism or any sort of,
indeed, indeed.
right. So you haven't there's an anthropologist, Leah Harrow, that you quote in the book. I have a very short quote from her. Like hope is tended an increase in dialogue and receptive listening. Our hope grows and we become better because we know how to listen. What's the relation between listening and hope?
Yeah. Listening serves multiple purposes. One, when it's situated within inquiry, listening is what enables us to gather evidence from others, to gather ideas from others. And when we listen, we have to open ourselves up to the fact that perhaps we're wrong. Maybe we don't know all of the information. Maybe we have a limited personal experience. And so listening opens us up to learning from others, and seeing how their views and experiences might differ from our own. It also then opens us up to new possibilities and new ideas. So when we're generating solutions, rarely is it the case that one person says we should do X and everyone says, why, yes, X is the ideal thing to do. It's very rare. Most often someone puts forward, hey, I like the idea of Y, and someone says, well, Y is pretty good, but we could make it even better if we added Z onto it. And then others kind of nurture and build those ideas. And so part of what's happening there is not just the putting forward of the additions or the revisions, but the listening of what has someone else put forward. So it's part of inquiry. It's also a part of the storytelling process. I kind of joked in a small quip in the book that I wish sometimes our politicians would tell fewer stories and listen more to the stories that their constituents tell. A lot of times on the campaign trail, politicians like to tout stories of, here in America, they use the phrase average Joes, your everyday citizen, and what their struggles are. And they use those to earn votes, to win over voters as if they understand the plight of American citizens. Instead, I would much prefer that our leaders were willing to sit and listen to more citizens, to actually understand the complexities of their struggles, as well as their ideas for improvement. And so that's kind of a hope that is upward directed toward those in power, that's based on listening from those in power. And then finally, I would say that receptive listening is partly what we need in these times of political polarization. We're very quick to affirm our tribal alliances and drawing the boundaries between one group and the next. And I think we would be much better served if we were willing to listen across those groups rather than asserting the differences between those groups continually. For example, last night here in the United States, we had the State of the Union address where our president addresses all citizens. And then there's a response given by the opposing party. And the opposing party speaker, I'm a very rough paraphrase. She said basically, the Democrats are crazy. And what bothers me about that sort of language, and it comes from both sides, I've certainly heard Democrats say that about Republicans, is it's a way that we stop listening to others. It tells us that group is not worthy of our time and our attention. They are epistemically, distorted. They are stupid. They're psychologically unwell. We're not going to spend time with them. That shuts down the opportunity to listen and learn from one another. And it's deeply concerning to me when we use that kind of rhetoric.
Correct. Yeah. Again, I go back to hope and habit, a quote from you in the question. In the end, most people think of habit as dull routines that we repeat exactly, doing the same thing the same ways, though in different places or at different times. But Dewey views habits slightly differently. He sees them as dispositions, proclivities to act in certain ways. Dewey notes any habit marks, quoting Dewey, any habit marks an inclination, an active preference, and choice for the conditions involved in its exercise, end of quote. You have specified parts of your book to the way Afro-American writers might respond to hope or optimism, as an example. Can we keep our hope when at the same time we can see people in other parts of the world bereft of hope?
Yeah, and this is one where it's been a challenge for me because I realize how much of my own personal privilege may render the conditions for me such that hope is supported and it is a disposition that I've developed because in general, my life has been fairly comfortable, etc. I was thinking just today on the radio, they were reporting the deaths coming out of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. And I was thinking so much about how do those folks sustain hope in the midst of a terrible natural disaster like this. And, those are the moments that really push me to think about how deep one's suffering can be and how disorienting that can be to move us away from the ability to hope. And when I engage with the Afro-pessimists in my writing, some of them have made a pretty convincing case that hope's not worth the time and effort because the situation is such that we can't end racism and therefore we should stop trying. Instead, we should shift our focus toward protecting ourselves, finding communities of Black joy together, et cetera, is kind of a mantra that's heard amongst some of those proponents. And I can see that, especially the need to protect oneself physically. We know that there's a considerable strain on the body when one has to endure racism, lack of opportunities, inequitable situations for decades. it wears the body down. And it's hard to hope when you're hungry and tired and in pain. And so I am increasingly persuaded by some of those authors, and yet I want to continue to push to say that there is a proclivity. If we understand habit as a disposition, something about the way we learn to respond to those conditions, it can sustain us and it can lead to better things. It's not to say it's a quick solution or a fast track to progress, but it's there and it's worthy of our attention and our nurturing.
Thank you. Let's go to Germany. The German philosopher Ernst Bloch has also written on hope.
Yes.
Into introduction to his book, The Principle of Hope, Ernst Bloch puts it this way: hope superior to fear is neither passive, like the latter, nor locked into nothingness. The emotion of hope goes out of itself, makes people broad instead of confining them, cannot know nearly enough of what it is, that makes them inwardly aimed, or what may be allied to them outwardly. The work of this emotion requires people who throw themselves actively into what is becoming, to what they themselves belong. It will not tolerate a dog's life, which feels itself only passively thrown into what it is, which is not seen through, even rigidly recognized. End of quote. How can, of course, that is from Ernst Bloch, and a classic on hope and utopia, of course. But how can fear be related to hopelessness? And it is sometimes the case that cynics are regarded as courageous people.
Well, I think fear is often paralyzing. Fear is what gets us stuck in those indeterminate situations that I mentioned of Dewey earlier. And that when we're in that moment of fear and we're uncertain what to do and we're hesitant to try ideas or solutions, we're afraid to move forward with those, it's a very paralyzing space. And I think that's where hopelessness lives, in that moment of feeling stuck, of feeling unempowered to move and change and improve. And cynicism, I talk in the book about cynicism as a distancing maneuver. I fear that what cynicism does is it's not that it's courage. In fact, perhaps the opposite. It's almost a way to say, I'm not going to engage with this idea. I'm going to laugh it off as ridiculous. I'm going to say it's a waste of my time and energy. And that cynic then pushes it away, that idea or that person. And rather than engage, it's almost a form of self-protection, so that the cynic doesn't have to rethink their views or consider alternatives. And in that regard, it doesn't feel courageous to me at all. Cynicism feels much more of a way of perpetuating fear, sustaining fear, because it doesn't engage with the problem nor with potential solutions.
And finally, my last question, Sarah. Um, I'm quoting you: unlike positive psychology, which uses a Sanders scale to measure hope without considering its impact on, sorry, on others, and unlike individualist accounts that are self-serving, pragmatist hope is social and political. It is guided by the need to work with and flourish alongside other citizens who are all deeply embedded in long-standing battles over power and recognition. End of quote. Is anything such as a universal understanding of hope possible, or you'd rather define hope only in relation to citizenship?
I talk about it in the book in terms of citizenship, but I'm not sure that's the only space for it. I can imagine religious communities, I can imagine cultural groups, etc., where there is a foundation for hope that's not necessarily tied to our life as citizens. I think I place it within citizenship because I focus on what I see as the fundamental civic question, and that is, what should we do? It's the kind of question we have to answer whenever we have to figure out how to live with others, when we solve a problem together, when we have to figure out how just to get along. We say, what should we do? And it's in that space of citizenship where the kind of inquiry and problem solving and listening and generation of ideas that are hoping happens. And so I think that's why I'm talking about citizen spaces and civic spaces, but I don't think it's only in those spaces where it happens.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for this generous exchange.